In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where slave traders hunt and empires crumble, there exists a truth that terrifies the cruel and powerful. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one who chooses mercy over violence. When hardened warriors tremble not from fear of death, but from the overwhelming shock of unexpected kindness, you know you're about to witness something that will shake the very foundations of what it means to be civilized. This is the story of how one human's gentle touch changed everything, and why the galaxy's most feared species learned to fear something far more powerful than any weapon: compassion. Commander Jake Morrison had seen enough death in his 43 years to last several lifetimes. The smoking ruins of the Kepler station stretched before him like a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. His boots crunched over debris as he led his salvage team through what remained of the outer docking bay. The acrid smell of burned electronics and something far worse filled his nostrils. "Another Zephyrian raid," muttered Sergeant Chun, her scanner beeping steadily as she swept the area for survivors. "Third one this month. These bastards are getting bolder." Jake nodded grimly. The Zephyrian Collective had been expanding their territory aggressively, enslaving entire populations and strip-mining worlds for resources. What made them particularly dangerous wasn't just their advanced technology or ruthless tactics. It was their complete disregard for any form of mercy. To them, other species were either useful slaves or obstacles to be eliminated. The human colonies in this sector had been fighting a losing battle against them for 2 years now. Jake's ship, the Defiance Edge, was one of the last independent vessels still operating rescue missions in contested space. Most of the other captains had either been killed, captured, or had simply given up and fled to safer systems. "Sir, I'm picking up some faint life signs from the lower levels," called out Corporal Williams from across the bay. "Looks like the emergency shelter's held." "How many?" Jake asked, already moving toward the sealed blast doors that led to the station's underground sections. "Hard to say. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. The readings are strange." Jake paused. Williams was the best sensor operator he'd ever worked with. If she said the readings were strange, there was definitely something unusual down there. Strange how? Some of them are human, but there are others. Different biorhythms, different body temperatures. And sir, she hesitated. Some of them are really small, like child-sized small. A chill ran down Jake's spine. The Zephyrians were known to take children as slaves. They were easier to control and could be trained from a young age to serve their masters without question. If there were kids down there, they'd been through hell. The blast doors were partially damaged, but still functional. It took their cutting tools nearly an hour to get through the multiple security layers. As they worked, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they found down there would change everything. The emergency shelter was a maze of interconnected rooms designed to keep people alive for weeks, if necessary. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls as Jake's team moved deeper into the complex. The air was stale but breathable, and the temperature was uncomfortably cold. They found the first group of survivors in what used to be the station's cafeteria. 12 humans, mostly workers, and their families huddled together in the corner. They looked up with a mixture of hope and terror as Jake's team entered. These people had been hiding for days, maybe weeks, surviving on emergency rations and recycled water. "It's okay," Jake said gently, removing his helmet so they could see his face. "We're human. We're here to help." The relief in their eyes was immediate and overwhelming. A woman clutched her young son tighter and began to cry. An older man stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Thank God," he whispered. We thought no one was coming." Jake's medic, Dr. Sarah Chun, the sergeant's sister, immediately began checking the survivors for injuries while Jake gathered information about what had happened. The story was disturbingly familiar. Zephyrian ships had appeared without warning, disabled the station's defenses, and begun rounding up everyone they could find. "They took most of the children first," the older man explained. His name was Marcus, and he'd been the station administrator, so they were more valuable. The rest of us, they just started shooting. We barely made it to the shelters in time. How long ago? Jake asked. 6 days. Maybe 7. Hard to keep track down here. Jake nodded. The trail was getting cold, but it wasn't impossible. Zephyrian slave ships were big and slow when fully loaded. If his team could track them. Sir, Williams called from the next room. You need to see this. Jake left Marcus with Dr. Chun and followed Williams deeper into the shelter. What he found in the next room made his blood run cold. It was clearly some kind of improvised prison. Makeshift cages had been constructed from furniture and debris, and there were signs of a struggle. But what caught his attention wasn't the damage. It was what was huddled in the far corner of the room. At first glance, it looked like a child. Small, maybe 4 feet tall, with delicate features and large eyes. But as Jake got closer, he realized this wasn't human. The skin had a subtle blue tint, and there were fine, almost invisible scales along the arms and neck. The ears were pointed, and the eyes were larger than any human's, a deep violet color that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and pain. The creature, Jake corrected himself, the person, was clearly female, though probably not a child. She wore the tattered remains of what looked like a military uniform, dark blue with silver insignia that Jake didn't recognize. Her hands were bound with some kind of energy restraints that glowed faintly red, and there was dried blood on her face and arms. She looked up as Jake approached, and he saw something in her eyes that made him stop in his tracks. It wasn't fear, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't even anger, though he could see that too. What he saw was a kind of resigned desperation, the look of someone who had been hurt so many times that they'd stopped hoping for anything better. Williams, get those restraints off her, Jake ordered quietly. Sir, we don't know what she is, Williams protested. She could be dangerous. Jake looked at the small figure huddled in the corner and shook his head. She's been a prisoner. Look at her. The alien woman flinched as Williams approached with the energy dampener tool. Jake could see her trying to make herself smaller, pressing back against the wall as if she could somehow disappear into it. Her whole body was trembling, not from cold but from something much deeper. Hey, Jake said softly, crouching down a few feet away from her. He made sure to keep his movements slow and non-threatening. We're not going to hurt you. We're here to help. She stared at him with those huge violet eyes, clearly not understanding his words, but maybe picking up on his tone. When Williams successfully disabled the restraints, the alien woman looked at her freed hands with something like amazement, as if she'd forgotten what it felt like not to be bound. Jake slowly extended his hand toward her, palm up, the way someone might approach a frightened animal. It's okay, he said gently. You're safe now. What happened next would be burned into Jake's memory for the rest of his life. The alien woman stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, she reached out and touched his palm with the tips of her fingers. The moment their skin made contact, she went completely rigid. Her eyes went wide, and she made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned, staring at him with an expression of complete shock. But it wasn't fear in her eyes anymore. It was something Jake had never expected to see. Wonder. What the hell was that about? Williams muttered. Jake had no idea, but something told him it was important. The alien woman was still staring at him, her breathing rapid and shallow. Very slowly, she extended her hand again, this time pressing her full palm against his. The trembling got worse. Her whole body shook like she was having some kind of seizure, but she didn't pull away. If anything, she pressed harder against his hand, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was feeling. She's never felt gentleness before, Dr. Chun said quietly. She'd finished with the human survivors and had come to see what was happening. Look at her. Those aren't just physical injuries. This is someone who's been systematically brutalized. She doesn't know how to process kindness. Jake felt a cold rage building in his chest. What kind of monsters took someone and hurt them so badly that a simple gentle touch was shocking? He thought about the Zephyrian reputation for cruelty and felt his jaw clench. The alien woman was studying his face now, her head tilted slightly to one side. Very carefully, she touched his cheek with her free hand, her fingers barely making contact with the skin. When he didn't pull away or strike her, she made that sound again, half sob, half gasp. "Sir," Sergeant Chun called from the entrance to the room. "We've got company topside. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace." Jake's blood turned to ice. "Zephyrian? Afraid so. And they're big ones." Jake looked down at the alien woman, who had gone rigid again at the mention of the Zephyrians. The fear was back in her eyes, but now there was something else too, a desperate kind of hope, as if she was silently begging him not to abandon her. "Get everyone to the ship," Jake ordered. "Full evacuation, right now." "What about her?" Williams asked, nodding toward the alien. Jake looked down at the small figure still pressing her palm against his. She was so delicate, so fragile-looking, but there was something in her eyes that suggested hidden strength, like a sword wrapped in silk. "She comes with us," he said firmly. "Sir, we don't know anything about her species, her capabilities. She comes with us," Jake repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. He gently scooped the alien woman into his arms, and she didn't resist. If anything, she seemed to relax slightly, as if being held gently was another impossibly foreign concept she was trying to process. As they made their way back through the shelter, Jake could feel her trembling against his chest. But it was different now. Not the helpless shaking of terror, but something else. Trust, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. The evacuation was a race against time. Jake's ship, the Defiant's Edge, was fast but not built for extended combat against Zephyrian battle cruisers. They managed to get all the survivors aboard just as the enemy ships entered weapons range. Jump coordinates locked in, called out his pilot, Lieutenant Torres. But those cruisers are jamming hyperspace in a 3-light-year radius. We're trapped in normal space. Jake settled the alien woman into a secured chair in the ship's small medical bay, making sure the restraints were loose enough not to frighten her. She watched his every movement with those enormous eyes, and when he started to leave, she made a small sound of distress. "I'll be back," he promised, not knowing if she understood him, but hoping his tone would convey the message. The next hour was a deadly game of cat and mouse through the asteroid field that surrounded Kepler Station. The Defiant's Edge was smaller and more maneuverable than the Zephyrian ships, but it couldn't run forever. Eventually, they'd have to fight or surrender. Jake had no intention of surrendering. The first battle was brief, but vicious. The Zephyrians had superior firepower, but Jake's crew had something the aliens lacked: desperate creativity. They used the asteroids as cover, set up ambushes, and managed to disable one of the 3 cruisers with a perfectly timed plasma torpedo. But it wasn't enough. The other 2 ships were closing in, and Jake's ship was taking heavy damage. "Structural integrity at 60%, Torres reported. Shields are failing." Jake was about to order them to prepare for boarding when something unexpected happened. The ship's internal communications system crackled to life, and a voice spoke, not human, but speaking perfect English with a melodious accent. "Commander Morrison, this is Zara Kethvi of the Sion Cooperative. We offer assistance." Jake looked at his communications officer, who shrugged helplessly. "Sir, I'm picking up a new ship signature. It just dropped out of hyperspace right on top of the Zephyrian formation." The view screen lit up with weapons fire as something attacked the Zephyrian cruisers from behind. Whatever it was fast and deadly efficient. Within minutes, both remaining enemy ships were either destroyed or retreating. "Commander Morrison," the voice came again. "Permission to come aboard. We must speak immediately." Jake looked around at his bridge crew, all of whom were staring at him expectantly. He thought about the small alien woman in the medical bay, about her trembling touch and the wonder in her eyes. "Granted," he said finally, "but you come alone and unarmed." As he headed to the docking bay, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his life, and maybe the fate of human space, had just taken a turn towards something completely unprecedented. Behind him, in the medical bay, a small alien fighter was discovering what it meant to be treated with kindness. And in the cold depths of space, word was already spreading through the underground networks of the galaxy. The humans had done something impossible. They had shown mercy to a Scion warrior. The implications of that simple act of gentleness would ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, reaching places and touching lives that Jake couldn't even imagine. But for now, all he knew was that when he'd touched her hand, something fundamental had changed. Not just for her, but for him too. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology, but their capacity for compassion. The being who stepped through the airlock of the Defiant's edge was unlike anything Jake had ever seen, yet strangely familiar. Tall and graceful, with the same subtle blue-tinged skin and pointed ears as the small woman they'd rescued. But there the similarities ended. This newcomer radiated confidence and deadly competence. She wore form-fitting armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. And though she'd agreed to come unarmed, Jake had the distinct impression that she could kill everyone on a ship with her bare hands if she chose to. "Commander Morrison," she said, inclining her head slightly. Her violet eyes were sharp and calculating, taking in every detail of the docking bay. "I am Captain Zara HFY of the Scion Cooperative Defense Fleet. We need to talk about the one you rescued." Jake studied her carefully. "The Scion Cooperative? I've never heard of you." "That was by design," Zara replied. "Until today, we preferred to remain hidden. But you have changed the equation considerably." She gestured toward the ship's interior. "May we speak privately? What I have to tell you concerns the survival of both our peoples." Jake led her to his personal quarters, the most secure room on the ship. As they walked through the corridors, he noticed how Zara's head turned slightly whenever they passed the medical bay. There was something in her expression, concern, maybe even worry. "She's safe," Jake said quietly. Zara stopped walking and looked at him directly. "You don't understand what you've done, Commander. That small alien woman you rescued? Her name is Kira Sithura, and she's one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy." Jake blinked in surprise. The trembling, fragile creature he'd carried from the shelter? A warrior? "I know it's hard to believe," Zara continued, reading his expression. "But Kira was the youngest battle singer ever inducted into the Scion military hierarchy. She could tear apart a Zephyrian battlecruiser with her bare hands. And she's personally responsible for liberating 17 slave worlds." They reached Jake's quarters, and he sealed the door behind them. "Battle singer." Zara sat down across from him, her movements graceful despite the obvious weight of her armor. "Your species lacks the proper context to understand what that means. Imagine your greatest warriors, your most skilled fighters, your most brilliant tacticians. Now imagine them enhanced by technology that links their minds directly to their weapons and ships. Battle singers don't just fight, they become one with the instruments of war itself." Jake thought about the small, terrified woman who had trembled at his touch. What happened to her? Zara's expression darkened. 6 months ago, Kira was captured during a deep reconnaissance mission in Zephyrian space. She was investigating reports of a new kind of slave processing facility, one that didn't just break bodies, but minds as well. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jake had heard rumors about Zephyrian psychological warfare techniques, but he'd hoped they were just stories. "They broke her," Zara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Systematically, methodically, scientifically. The Zephyrians have been studying Scion psychology for decades, learning exactly how to destroy what makes us who we are. They took one of our greatest warriors and turned her into what? A weapon against her own people. They plan to use her knowledge of our tactics, our hidden bases, our defenses. But first, they had to break her spirit completely." Jake felt sick. "How?" Zara was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "They hurt her, Commander, in ways that I cannot fully explain to someone who isn't Scion. Physical torture was only the beginning. They attacked her mind, her sense of self, her connection to what we call the song, the spiritual link that connects all Scion to each other and to the universe itself. She looked up at Jake with eyes that held depths of pain he couldn't begin to fathom. For 6 months, every single interaction Kira had with another sentient being involved pain, humiliation, or degradation. Every touch was designed to hurt. Every word was calculated to destroy another piece of her soul. They were very, very good at it. Jake thought about the wonder in Kira's eyes when he'd simply offered her his hand. The shock when she'd realized his touch wasn't going to hurt her. She's never felt kindness before. Not in 6 months, no. And before her capture, kindness was rare. The Sion are not a gentle people, Commander. We are warriors born from a harsh world. Strength is valued above all else. Tenderness is seen as weakness. But she responded to it. Zara nodded slowly. That's what makes no sense. That's why everything has changed. She leaned forward. Commander, when a Sion warrior is broken the way Kira has been broken, they don't recover. Ever. The damage is too profound, too complete. They either die or they become empty shells, alive but not truly living. But somehow, your simple act of gentleness reached something inside her that the Zephyrians couldn't destroy. In 6 months of the most sophisticated psychological torture imaginable, they couldn't break whatever responded to your kindness. Jake was beginning to understand the implications. And that means, it means you've done something that shouldn't be possible. You've given hope to someone who is supposed to be hopeless. And more than that, you've proven that there's something in the human approach to other species that we've never encountered before. Zara stood and began pacing, her armor making soft, whisking sounds as she moved. Commander, the Sion Cooperative has been watching humanity for several years now. We've been impressed by your technology, your adaptability, your courage in the face of Zephyrian expansion. But we never considered you as potential allies because we assumed you were like every other species we've encountered, ultimately self-interested, ultimately cruel when it served your purposes. And now we have evidence that humans might be capable of something we thought was extinct in the galaxy. Genuine altruism. Kindness without expectation of reward. Mercy shown to enemies. Jake thought about all the worlds humanity had lost to the Zephyrians, all the colonies that had been enslaved or destroyed. We're not always merciful. No, Zara agreed. But the fact that you're capable of it at all makes you unique. Do you understand what this means for the war against the Zephyrians? Before Jake could answer, an alarm began blaring throughout the ship. His communicator crackled to life with Lieutenant Torres's voice, captain to the bridge immediately. We have a situation. Jake and Zara rushed to the bridge, where chaos was unfolding on the main view screen. A massive Zephyrian fleet was dropping out of hyperspace. Not just a few ships, but dozens of them. Battle cruisers, destroyers, carrier ships bristling with fighter craft. Sir, Torres reported, his face pale. Long-range sensors show at least 40 ships. They've got us completely surrounded. How did they find us so quickly? Jake demanded. Unknown, sir. But they're broadcasting on all frequencies. The message is unusual. Put it through. The main screen flickered, and a Zephyrian appeared. Jake had seen their species before, but only in intelligence briefings. They were tall, gaunt creatures with gray skin and multiple arms. Their faces were angular and sharp, with black eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When the Zephyrian spoke, its voice was like grinding metal. Human vessel Defiance Edge, you are harboring stolen Zephyrian property. Return the Sion female immediately, and we will grant you a swift death rather than the prolonged suffering you deserve for interfering in our operations. Jake looked at Zara, whose expression had gone deadly cold. Stolen property? They consider all their slaves to be property, she replied, including prisoners of war. The Zephyrian continued. You have 1 standard hour to comply. After that time, we will board your vessel and reclaim what belongs to us. The human crew will be processed for slavery or executed, depending on their usefulness. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. 40 ships, Torres said quietly. We can't fight them all. We can't run either, Sergeant Chin added. They've got hyperspace jammers active across the entire system. Jake stared at the view screen, his mind racing. 40 Zephyrian warships against his single light cruiser. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. "There's another option," Zara said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She was standing very still, her violet eyes focused on something only she could see. "The Sion fleet," Jake said, understanding immediately. Zara shook her head. "Even if I called them now, they couldn't get here in time. And we don't have enough ships in this sector to make a difference." "Then what?" Zara looked directly at him. "Kira, she's broken," Jake protested. "You said so yourself." "I said she was broken by Zephyrian standards." "But you started something, Commander. When you showed her kindness, you gave her something to fight for besides revenge or duty. You gave her hope." Jake thought about the small woman in the medical bay. She can barely speak. How is she supposed to fight 40 warships? "Because she's not just any warrior," Zara replied. "She's a battle singer. And, more than that, she's the daughter of the High Admiral of the Sion fleet." The bridge went completely silent. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "Kira Cythera is Sion royalty, Commander. The heir to the most powerful military family in cooperative space. When the Zephyrians captured her, they didn't just take a warrior. They took the future leader of our entire civilization." Jake sank into his captain's chair. "And you think she can fight?" "I think she can do something even more important," Zara replied. "I think she can call home." Before Jake could ask what that meant, another voice cut through the bridge's communication system. It was soft, melodious, speaking in a language Jake didn't recognize but somehow understood. The words seemed to bypass his ears entirely and speak directly to his soul. It was Kira, and she was singing. The song was heartbreakingly beautiful and utterly alien. It spoke of loss and pain, of hope crushed and dreams destroyed. But underneath the sadness, there was something else, a note of defiance that grew stronger with each phrase. "The battle song," Zara whispered, her eyes wide. "She's actually doing it." "What's happening?" Jake demanded. "She's calling the fleet," Zara replied. "Not through technology, not through communications arrays. She's using the song itself, the psychic link that connects all Sion across space and time." The singing continued, and Jake could swear he felt something responding to it. Deep in his chest, something was resonating with Kira's voice. Around the bridge, he saw his crew members looking confused and moved, as if they too were feeling something they couldn't quite explain. "How long?" Jake asked. "For the fleet to arrive?" "Hours, maybe days." "But, Commander," Zara's expression was troubled. "The song takes an enormous toll on the singer, especially someone in Kira's condition. If she maintains this for too long, she'll die." "Yes." Jake looked at the countdown on his screen. 52 minutes until the Zephyrians boarded his ship. Hours until potential rescue arrived. And in the medical bay, a small alien woman was literally singing her life away to save the humans who had shown her a moment of kindness. "Give me ship-wide communications," Jake ordered. "Sir, all hands, all frequencies. I want everyone to hear this." Torres activated the system, and Jake's voice went out to every corner of his ship, reaching not only his crew, but probably the Zephyrian fleet as well. "This is Commander Morrison speaking. In a few minutes, we're going to be boarded by an enemy that considers mercy to be weakness and kindness to be foolishness. They think they can break us the same way they broke the small woman singing in our medical bay." He paused, listening to Kira's voice echoing through the ship's corridors. "They're wrong. We're human. And that means something. It means we don't abandon people who need help. It means we don't surrender our souls to save our lives. And it means we show mercy not because our enemies deserve it, but because we choose to remain human." Jake looked around his bridge, seeing the determination growing in his crew's faces. They want to take her back. They want to finish breaking her, use her against her own people, and then probably kill her when she's no longer useful. His voice hardened. "Over my dead body." Cheers echoed through the ship's communication system. In the medical bay, Kira's song took on a different note. Still sad, still defiant, but now touched with something that might have been hope. The Zephyrian fleet was closing in, 40 ships against one. But for the first time since the crisis began, Jake felt like they might actually have a chance. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon in the galaxy isn't technology or firepower or superior numbers. Sometimes it's simply the decision to do what's right, regardless of the cost. And as Kira's song filled the darkness of space, reaching across impossible distances to touch the hearts and minds of her people, Jake realized that he and his crew were about to become part of something much larger than a simple rescue mission. They were about to change the course of galactic history, one act of kindness at a time. The first Zephyrian boarding pods struck the Defiant's edge like metal fists punching through paper. Jake felt the ship shudder under the impact as the enemy craft attached themselves to his hull and began burning through the outer plating. In the medical bay, Kira's song never faltered, even as the sound of cutting torches echoed through the corridors. Boarding parties are breaching decks 3, 5, and 7, Sergeant Chin reported from the security station. At least 60 hostiles, probably more coming. Jake checked his sidearm and looked around the bridge. His crew was small, only 18 people total, and they were about to face trained Zephyrian shock troops. The odds were impossible, but surrender wasn't an option. Not while Kira was still singing, still calling for help across the vast emptiness of space. Torres, seal the bridge and prepare for siege protocol, Jake ordered. Chun, I want every civilian in the emergency bunkers. Dr. Chun, you stay with our guest. Don't let anything happen to her. Sir, the medic replied. Her vital signs are becoming erratic. The strain of maintaining the song is enormous. I don't know how much longer she'll hold, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. She's stronger than they broke her to be. The first explosions came from Deck 5. Jake watched his security monitors as Zephyrian soldiers poured through the breach points like a gray tide. They moved with mechanical precision, their multiple arms allowing them to carry weapons and shield simultaneously while still maintaining perfect coordination. But something was wrong with their advance. Jake had studied Zephyrian tactics extensively, and this wasn't how they normally operated. Usually, they would split up to maximize coverage and overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers. Instead, they were moving in tight formations, all converging on a single destination. They're not trying to take the ship, Jake realized. They're heading straight for the medical bay. Zara, who had been quietly studying the tactical displays, nodded grimly. They want Kira back alive. Everything else is secondary. Then, that's where we make our stand. Jake led his team through the ship's corridors, using service tunnels and maintenance shafts to avoid the main Zephyrian advance. The sound of Kira's song grew stronger as they approached the medical section, and Jake could swear he felt something else responding to it, a presence at the edge of his consciousness, vast and ancient and utterly alien. They reached the medical bay just as the first Zephyrian squad rounded the corner. The aliens moved with their characteristic mechanical precision, but there was something different about them now. They seemed nervous. Jake understood why the moment he saw Kira. She was standing in the center of the medical bay, no longer the broken, trembling creature he'd rescued. The song had transformed her. Her violet eyes blazed with inner fire, and her small frame seemed to radiate power. The air around her actually shimmered, as if reality itself was bending to accommodate the force of her will. But it was killing her. Jake could see the strain on her face, the tremor in her hands, as she maintained the psychic connection across impossible distances. Blood trickled from her nose, and her breathing was labored. Hold this position, Jake ordered his team. Nothing gets through. The first firefight was brief and vicious. Zephyrian energy weapons filled the corridor with deadly light, while Jake's crew responded with projectile weapons and whatever cover they could find. The aliens were better armed and better trained, but they were fighting in a confined space against defenders who had nothing left to lose. More importantly, they were fighting in the presence of something they'd never encountered before, a battle singer in full communion with the song. Kira's voice rose higher, taking on harmonics that seemed to vibrate in Jake's bones. The Zephyrians faltered, their mechanical precision disrupted by something they couldn't understand or quantify. Several of them actually dropped their weapons, clawing at their heads, as if trying to block out a sound that was coming from inside their own minds. The song affects them, Zara observed, firing precise shots from behind an overturned medical cart. They're not prepared for psychic warfare. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jake's team held the corridor, but barely. They were running low on ammunition, and more Zephyrian troops were pouring onto the ship. Sooner or later, the aliens would overwhelm them through sheer numbers. That's when everything changed. Kira's song suddenly shifted, taking on a new tone. Where before it had been a call for help, a desperate plea across the void, now it became something else entirely. It became a war cry. The air in the medical bay began to glow, not with artificial light, but with something deeper, a radiance that seemed to come from the fabric of space itself. Jake felt his skin tingling, and the hair on his arms stood up as if he were in the middle of an electrical storm. "She's not just calling the fleet anymore," Zara whispered, her eyes wide with awe and terror. "She's calling the ancestors." "What does that mean?" Jake demanded, still firing at the Zephyrian position. "The song connects all Sion across space and time," Zara explained. "Past, present, future. The greatest battle singers can reach back through generations, drawing on the power of those who came before." The glow around Kira intensified, and suddenly Jake could see them, translucent figures standing around her, their forms shifting and wavering like mirages. Sion warriors from ages past, their faces proud and fierce, their hands resting on weapons that existed somewhere between reality and memory. The Zephyrians saw them too. The mechanical precision of their attack crumbled as ancient terror gripped them. These were the nightmares of their species made manifest. The Sion death singers whose voices had once shattered fleets, and whose memories still haunted Zephyrian battle doctrine. But the manifestation was costing Kira everything she had left. Jake could see her life force being consumed by the effort, her physical form becoming more translucent with each passing moment. She was literally burning herself out to maintain the connection. "She's dying," Dr. Chen reported, reading her instruments with growing alarm. "Her bio readings are completely off the charts. If she doesn't stop soon." Jake made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he'd ever developed. He dropped his weapon and walked directly into the circle of ancestral spirits surrounding Kira. The moment he entered the field of psychic energy, Jake felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his physical form. He could sense the vast network of the song stretching across the galaxy, connecting billions of Sion minds in an intricate web of shared experience. And at the center of it all was Kira, burning like a star as she channeled power that was never meant to be wielded by a single individual. Jake reached out and took her hand. The effect was immediate and shocking. The ancestral spirits turned to look at him, their ancient eyes filled with surprise. A human? Here? In the sacred space of the song? But then something impossible happened. The spirits began to smile. Jake felt their recognition, their understanding. Here was a being who had shown kindness without expectation of reward, who had offered mercy to an enemy, who had chosen compassion over cruelty, even when it served no strategic purpose. The ancestors approved. Power flowed through Jake's connection to Kira, but it was different from the raw psychic force she'd been channeling. This was something gentler, more sustainable. Where before she'd been drawing on the fury and pain of warriors long dead, now she was accessing something else entirely. Their love, their protective instincts, their desire to shelter the innocent. Kira's eyes focused on Jake's face, and for the first time since he'd found her, she truly smiled. "Thank you," she whispered in perfectly clear English, her voice carrying harmonics of the song, "for reminding me that I am more than what they made me." The battle in the corridor had stopped entirely. Zephyrians and humans alike stood frozen, staring at the impossible scene playing out in the medical bay. The ancestral spirits were fading now, their purpose fulfilled, but their blessing remained. Kira raised her voice one final time, and this time her song was answered. Space outside the Defiant's edge erupted in brilliant light as ships materialized out of hyperspace. Not dozens, but hundreds of them. The entire Sion cooperative fleet responding to the call of their lost princess. The Zephyrian boarding parties didn't even try to fight their way out. Faced with the combined might of the Sion military and the lingering terror of what they'd witnessed in the medical bay, they surrendered without firing another shot. But Jake barely noticed the tactical situation. His attention was focused entirely on Kira, who was still holding his hand and looking at him with an expression of wonder that made his heart ache. "You saved me," she said simply. Jake shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were." "No," Kira replied, her voice growing stronger. "You showed me who I could become. The Zephyrians took away my past, but you gave me a future." Around them, the ship was filling with Sion soldiers as the rescue fleet sent over boarding parties of their own. But in the quiet space of the medical bay, two beings from different worlds were discovering that kindness truly was the most powerful force in the universe. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Kira looked toward the viewport, where the Sion fleet hung in perfect formation against the stars. "Now we go home, and we prepare for war." "Against the Zephyrians?" "With humans as our allies," she corrected. "You've shown us something we'd forgotten, Commander Morrison. You've reminded us that strength without mercy is just another form of weakness." Jake felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. First contact between humanity and the Sion Cooperative hadn't come through diplomacy or trade negotiations. It had come through a simple act of kindness to a broken prisoner. But as he looked into Kira's eyes and saw the hope burning there like a beacon, Jake realized that maybe that was exactly how it was supposed to happen. Maybe the greatest alliances weren't built on shared interests or mutual benefit. Maybe they were built on shared compassion. The war against the Zephyrians was far from over. But for the first time in years, Jake felt like it might actually be winnable. And it had all started with the trembling of a small alien woman who had never expected gentle treatment, and received it anyway. In the depths of space, ancient powers stirred in response to Kira's song. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the cosmic balance. Humanity had allies now, and more than that, they had hope. 3 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the Sion flagship Heart of the Void, watching the largest combined fleet in galactic history prepare for battle. Hundreds of human vessels hung alongside thousands of Sion warships, their crews training together, learning each other's languages and tactics, forging bonds that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. What had started as a desperate rescue mission had evolved into the most significant military alliance in recorded galactic history. The Sion Cooperative, humanity's various colonial governments, and even several smaller species had joined together under a single banner, the Free Galaxy Coalition. But the real miracle was standing beside him, studying tactical displays with the focused intensity that had made her legendary among her people. Kira had changed almost beyond recognition. The broken, trembling prisoner he'd found on Kepler Station was gone, replaced by someone who radiated quiet confidence and unshakable determination. She still bore the scars of her captivity, physical and emotional marks that would probably never fully heal, but she transformed them into sources of strength rather than weakness. The Zephyrian response fleet will drop out of hyperspace in approximately 6 hours, she reported, her English now flawless despite the melodious accent that marked her as Sion. Intelligence suggests they're bringing everything they have, over 2,000 ships, including their new Dreadnought-class vessels. Jake nodded, studying the holographic display that showed the enemy fleet's projected approach vector. "And our chances? Better than they would have been 3 months ago," Kira replied with a slight smile. The integration of human tactical flexibility with Sion battle-singing techniques has produced some, interesting results. That was an understatement. The hybrid combat techniques developed by the joint human-Psion command structure had revolutionized space warfare. Human creativity and adaptability, combined with Psion's psychic coordination and ancient battle wisdom, had created fighting units unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Jake had witnessed the first field tests himself. Psion battle singers could coordinate the movements of entire fleets with perfect precision, while human tactical officers provided the unpredictable strategies that kept enemies off balance. The combination was devastatingly effective, but it was more than just military cooperation. In the months since first contact, the two species had discovered profound compatibility on almost every level. Human emotional openness had helped heal psychological wounds that the Psion had been carrying for generations, while Psion wisdom and spiritual depth had given humanity a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Admiral HFY is requesting your presence on the bridge, Kira said, checking the communication device on her wrist. The final strategy briefing is about to begin. Jake followed her through the ship's corridors, still amazed by the casual integration he saw everywhere. Human technicians worked alongside Psion engineers, sharing jokes and techniques with the easy familiarity of old friends. Children from both species played together in the ship's recreational areas, their laughter echoing through passages that had once known only the discipline of military precision. It was Kira who had made most of this possible. Her recovery had become a symbol of hope throughout the coalition. If a warrior as broken as she had been could heal and grow stronger, then maybe the galaxy itself could overcome the darkness that had been consuming it. More than that, she'd become a bridge between the two species. Her fluency in both human languages and Psion combat techniques made her an ideal translator, not just of words but of concepts and cultural nuances. When human commanders struggled to understand Psion battle philosophy, or when Psion warriors were confused by human emotional expressions, Kira was there to explain and interpret. Jake had watched her work with growing admiration and something deeper that he was still afraid to name. The Bridge of the Heart of the Void was a masterpiece of integrated design. Psion control surfaces flowed seamlessly into human design displays, creating a command center that felt both alien and familiar. Good, we can begin. The holographic display showed the upcoming battlefield in exquisite detail. The Zephyrian fleet would emerge from hyperspace near the outer edge of the Kepler system, where the wreckage of the old station still orbited like a monument to their cruelty. The Coalition fleet would meet them there, in the same space where this entire alliance had begun with a single act of kindness. The enemy is bringing their full reserve fleet, Admiral HFY explained. This isn't just another raid or territorial expansion. They're trying to crush us completely before we can become a real threat to their empire. Jake studied the tactical projections. The Zephyrian fleet outnumbered them nearly 3-1, and their Dreadnought-class ships were rumored to be capable of destroying entire planets. By any rational analysis, the Coalition should have been preparing for defeat, not victory. But rationality didn't account for what had happened over the past 3 months. It didn't factor in the bonds that had formed between species that should have had nothing in common. It didn't consider the power of hope restored or the strength that came from fighting for something worth preserving. What's our strategy? Jake asked. Kira stepped forward, activating a series of tactical overlays. We're not going to fight their kind of battle, she said. Conventional tactics favor the side with superior numbers and firepower. Instead, we're going to do something they've never seen before. The display shifted, showing the Coalition fleet arranged in a pattern that looked almost organic. Instead of the rigid geometric formations favored by most military doctrines, the ships were positioned like a living organism, flexible, adaptive, capable of rapid response and evolution. The battlesong formation, Admiral HFY explained. Every ship in the fleet will be psychically linked through our battle singers, allowing for perfect coordination and instantaneous communication. But instead of using this network just for tactical commands, we're going to use it to share human strategic thinking across the entire force. Jake began to understand. You're going to make the entire fleet think like humans. More than that, Kira said, her eyes bright with excitement. We're going to make them think like humans who have learned to trust and care for each other. The Zephyrians understand cruelty. They understand fear. They understand the logic of domination. But they've never faced an enemy that fights out of love. The concept was revolutionary. Traditional military doctrine treated affection and emotional bonds as potential weaknesses, complications that could interfere with rational decision-making. But the coalition was proposing to turn those bonds into weapons. "Sir," interrupted Lieutenant Torres, who was serving as Jake's aide for the battle. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. They're demanding to speak with you personally." Jake exchanged glances with Admiral HFY and Kira. "Put it through." The holographic display shifted to show the bridge of a Zephyrian dreadnought. The alien commander was larger than most of his species, with ceremonial scars covering his gray skin and multiple weapon attachments grafted directly into his arms. When he spoke, his voice carried the grinding mechanical tone that Jake had learned to associate with Zephyrian authority. "Human Commander Morrison," the alien said, "I am Fleet Lord Kethzon, Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian Expansion Fleet. You are harboring stolen property that belongs to the Collective." "Princess Kira Sithura is not property," Jake replied evenly. "She's a free citizen of the Sion Cooperative and a valued ally of humanity. The creature you call Princess is a broken tool that we discarded when it ceased to function properly," Kethzon sneered. "Return it to us for proper disposal, and we will allow your pathetic alliance to surrender with minimal casualties." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but before he could respond, Kira stepped into view of the transmission pickup. The effect on the Zephyrian commander was immediate and shocking. His multiple arms went rigid, and his black eyes widened in what Jake could only interpret as terror. "Hello, Kethzon," Kira said calmly. Her voice carried undertones of the battle song, harmonics that seemed to vibrate in dimensions Jake couldn't perceive. "Do you remember me?" "Impossible," the Zephyrian whispered. "You were broken. Completely broken. We confirmed the psychological destruction was total." Kira smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Jake's blood run cold. It wasn't cruelty exactly, but it was definitely not entirely human either. "You broke a frightened, isolated warrior," she said. "But you could never have broken what I became when Commander Morrison showed me that I was worth saving." She stepped closer to the pickup, and Jake could swear the temperature on the bridge dropped several degrees. "You taught me that pain has limits," Kira continued. "That even the most sophisticated torture eventually runs out of new ways to hurt someone. But do you know what has no limits, Kethzon?" The Zephyrian commander's breathing had become rapid and shallow. "What? Love," Kira said simply. "The determination to protect something precious. The strength that comes from knowing you're fighting for more than just yourself." She gestured around the bridge, where human and Sion officers worked side by side with easy cooperation. "You created me, Kethzon. Every moment of pain, every degradation, every attempt to break my spirit, all of it led to this moment. Because if you hadn't hurt me so thoroughly, I never would have learned to recognize kindness when I found it." The transmission flickered, and Jake realized the Zephyrian commander's hand were shaking too badly to maintain proper control. "So, thank you," Kira finished, "for creating the greatest weapon you'll ever face. A warrior who fights not from anger or hatred, but from gratitude and love." She reached out and terminated the transmission, leaving the coalition bridge in stunned silence. "Well, Admiral HFY said finally, that should have an interesting effect on their morale." Jake looked at Kira, seeing her in a new light. She wasn't just a survivor, or even just a warrior. She'd become something unprecedented in galactic history, a weapon forged from compassion and tempered by genuine human kindness. "Are you ready for this?" he asked her quietly. Kira turned to face him, and Jake saw something in her eyes that took his breath away. It wasn't the desperate hope he'd seen when they first met, or even the quiet determination she'd shown during her recovery. This was something deeper and more powerful. This was absolute certainty. "I was born ready," she said. "I just had to remember who I was." The alert klaxons began sounding throughout the ship. On the main display, space itself seemed to tear open as the Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a formation that blocked out the stars. 2,000 enemy ships against 800 coalition vessels. The largest space battle in recorded history was about to begin. But as Jake took his position at the tactical station, as Kira began the opening notes of the battle song that would coordinate their fleet as human and Sion crews prepare to fight and die for each other, he felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. He felt invincible, because sometimes the greatest victories don't come from superior firepower or brilliant strategy. Sometimes they come from the simple recognition that some things are worth dying for. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they're worth living for too. The battle was about to begin, but in many ways, it was already won. The Zephyrians had taught the galaxy that cruelty was strength, that mercy was weakness, that the only law was the rule of the strong over the weak. Now they were about to learn how wrong they'd been. Kindness, it turned out, was the most powerful force in the universe. And Jake Morrison's small act of compassion was about to echo across the galaxy in ways that would reshape the course of galactic civilization forever. The Battle of Kepler would be remembered for 10,000 years as the day the galaxy learned that love could triumph over hate, that compassion could conquer cruelty, and that the bonds between different species could forge weapons more powerful than any technology. But in the moment, as Jake watched 2,000 Zephyrian warships bearing down on their position, it just looked like the end of everything he'd worked to build. The enemy fleet moved with mechanical precision, their dreadnought-class vessels forming the center of a formation designed to maximize firepower and minimize vulnerability. Smaller cruisers and destroyers spread out in perfect geometric patterns, creating overlapping fields of fire that would turn the battle space into a killing field. Battle song initiating, Kira announced from her position at the psychic coordination console. Her voice carried harmonics that Jake could feel in his bones, and around the bridge, both human and Sion crew members straightened as the connection established itself. This was the moment of truth. For 3 months, they'd theorized and trained and hoped. Now, they would discover whether the bonds they'd forged were strong enough to survive the ultimate test. The first phase of the battle unfolded exactly as Admiral HFY had predicted. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire at maximum range, pouring devastating energy into the space where conventional military doctrine said the coalition forces should have positioned themselves. But the coalition fleet wasn't there. Instead of maintaining rigid formations, the ships moved like a school of fish responding to a predator. They flowed and adapted, turned and wheeled, all in perfect synchronization thanks to the battle song network that connected every vessel in the fleet. Zephyrian targeting computers, designed to track predictable movement patterns, found themselves firing at empty space. Phase 1 complete, Admiral HFY reported. Enemy coordination protocols are adapting. Initiating Phase 2. This was where human creativity entered the equation. Instead of responding with their own long-range bombardment, the coalition fleet did something unprecedented. They scattered. Ships broke off in seemingly random directions, abandoning all semblance of coordinated strategy. To the Zephyrian commanders, it must have looked like panic, a complete breakdown of command authority. But Jake, connected to the battle song through his proximity to Kira, could feel the deeper pattern. Every ship in the fleet was following its own improvised strategy, but those strategies were all harmonized through the psychic network. It was like listening to a jazz performance where every musician was soloing simultaneously, yet somehow creating perfect music. The Zephyrians pursued, their formations breaking up as they chased what they believed were fleeing enemies. This was their fundamental mistake. They thought they were hunting cowards when they were actually being herded by predators. "Now," Kira whispered, her voice carrying through the battle song to every ship in the fleet. The coalition vessels turned as one and struck back. But this wasn't conventional space warfare. This was something new, something that combined the best of human ingenuity with the deepest secrets of Sion battle philosophy. Ships didn't just fight, they danced. Weapons didn't just fire, they sang. The entire engagement became a kind of deadly poetry in motion. Jake watched in awe as a squadron of human destroyers coordinated with Sion battle singers to create a moving web of destruction that trapped an entire Zephyrian cruiser group. The enemy ships found themselves unable to maneuver, hemmed in by precisely placed fire that seemed to anticipate their every move. "How are we doing this?" he asked Kira. "We're not thinking like individual ships," she replied, her eyes closed in concentration as she maintained the psychic network. "We're thinking like one organism with 800 bodies. Every decision is made with perfect knowledge of every other decision." The battle raged for hours, but it wasn't the grinding attrition that characterized most large-scale space engagements. Instead, it was fluid and dynamic, constantly shifting as the two fleets maneuvered for advantage. The turning point came when the Zephyrian dreadnoughts finally entered optimal firing position. These massive vessels were the collective's ultimate weapons, ships capable of cracking planets and obliterating entire fleets with their main batteries. As they powered up their primary systems, space itself seemed to shudder in anticipation of the devastation to come. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Admiral Kethvi ordered. But Kira had a different idea. "No," she said quietly. "Hold position. Princess, those dreadnoughts will destroy us," the Admiral protested. Kira opened her eyes, and Jake saw something in them that made his heart skip a beat. It wasn't fear or determination or even hope. It was joy. "Trust me," she said. The battle song shifted, taking on new harmonics that Jake had never heard before. Around the bridge, both human and Sion crew members began to smile, as if they were sharing in some cosmic joke that only they understood. The dreadnoughts fired. Beams of concentrated energy lanced out across space, each one capable of vaporizing a moon. They struck the coalition fleet dead center, exactly where conventional tactics said the most damage would be done. But the ships weren't there. At the last possible moment, the entire coalition fleet had shifted position by exactly the right amount to avoid the barrage. Not scattered, not fleeing, but moved as one perfectly coordinated entity. 800 ships dancing out of the way of annihilation with the grace of a single organism. The Zephyrian commanders were still processing this impossibility when the coalition counterattack began. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration. Ships that had spent months learning to trust each other completely now showed what that trust could accomplish. Human tactical flexibility, guided by Sion, psychic coordination, created patterns of attack that the enemy literally couldn't comprehend. Zephyrian vessels found themselves surrounded by enemies that seemed to appear from nowhere. Their rigid command structures, designed for predictable warfare between conventional forces, simply couldn't adapt fast enough to respond to an opponent that thought and moved as a unified whole. But it was more than just superior tactics. Jake could feel it through his connection to the battle song. The coalition fleet was fighting for something the Zephyrians had never experienced. They were fighting for each other. Every human captain knew that Sion warriors would die to protect their ships. Every Sion battle singer felt the determination of human crews to defend their alien allies. The entire fleet was bound together by bonds of genuine affection and mutual respect that made them literally unstoppable. When the first Zephyrian ship surrendered, Jake thought it was an anomaly. When the fifth ship surrendered, he realized something unprecedented was happening. When entire squadrons began laying down their arms rather than continuing to fight, he understood that they were witnessing the end of an empire. "They're not just losing," Kira explained, her voice filled with wonder. "They're learning." She was right. Through the battle song network, Jake could sense something that defied belief. Zephyrian minds, cruel, mechanical, seemingly incapable of concepts like mercy or compassion, were being touched by the bonds that held the coalition fleet together. For the first time in their species' history, Zephyrian warriors were experiencing what it felt like to be part of something larger than themselves. They were feeling the joy that came from fighting not out of hatred or fear, but out of love for their comrades. And they were surrendering because they wanted more of it. The battle ended not with a final decisive engagement, but with something no one had thought possible: the voluntary surrender of the entire Zephyrian fleet. Fleet Lord Kethzon himself requested permission to come aboard the Coalition flagship. When he materialized in the transport bay, Jake barely recognized him. The arrogant commander who had demanded Kira's return was gone, replaced by someone who looked smaller, somehow humbled. "I do not understand what has happened to us," he said in his grinding mechanical voice. "My warriors report feelings that have no designation in our language. They speak of wanting to protect your ships rather than destroy them." Kira stepped forward, and Jake tensed, remembering the cold fury she displayed during their earlier communication. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "They're feeling what it's like to be cared for," she said simply. "Your warriors are experiencing love for the first time." Kethzon's multiple eyes focused on her with something like desperation. "Is this weapon? Some form of psychological warfare?" "No," Jake said, moving to stand beside Kira. "It's what happens when you treat people like they matter. When you show them kindness without expecting anything in return." The Zephyrian commander was quiet for a long moment, processing concepts that a species had no framework for understanding. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now we rebuild," Admiral HFY replied. "All of us, together." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy watched in amazement as the impossible became routine. Zephyrian warriors who had spent their entire lives conquering and enslaving other species began learning to cooperate instead of dominate. Their rigid hierarchies slowly gave way to more flexible structures that allowed for individual expression and creative thinking. It wasn't easy. Generations of conditioning couldn't be overcome overnight, and there were setbacks and conflicts along the way. But the bonds forged in the Battle of Kepler proved stronger than centuries of hatred and mistrust. Jake found himself at the center of diplomatic negotiations that would reshape the political structure of the galaxy. The coalition expanded to include dozens of species, all united by the simple principle that had started it all: the belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. But his most important work was much more personal. "You know," Kira said one evening as they stood together on the observation deck of the new Coalition headquarters station, "when I first felt your touch, I thought it was impossible. I'd forgotten that gentleness existed." Jake took her hand, marveling as he always did at how perfectly it fit in his. "What do you think now?" She smiled, the expression transforming her face in ways that still took his breath away. "Now I think impossible things happen every day. We just have to be brave enough to believe in them." Outside the viewport, the lights of 1,000 ships from a dozen species created a tapestry of cooperation that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. Human vessels docked alongside Sion warships, while former Zephyrian cruisers learned to serve as guardians rather than predators. "What happens next?" Jake asked, echoing the question that had defined their entire journey together. "Next," Kira said, leaning against him with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned to trust completely, "we keep being impossible. We keep showing the galaxy that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that love is more powerful than hate, and that the best weapon against darkness is simply refusing to give up hope." She paused, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed cold and distant but warm and welcoming. "And maybe," she added with a smile that held the promise of forever, "we find out what other impossible things we can do together." Jake wrapped his arms around her, holding the small alien warrior who had trembled at his touch and grown into the strongest person he'd ever known. Around them, the galaxy spun on toward a future that was brighter and more hopeful than anyone had dared to imagine. It had all started with a single act of kindness to someone who needed help. It had grown into an alliance that transformed entire civilizations. And now it would become the foundation for a new kind of galactic society, one built not on conquest or domination, but on the revolutionary idea that everyone, regardless of species or origin, was valuable. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not their technology or their tactical brilliance or their courage in battle, but their simple, stubborn insistence on treating others with compassion. And sometimes that's all it takes to change the universe. The little alien fighter had trembled at his touch because she'd never experienced gentleness before. Now, she was helping to build a galaxy where no one would have to live without it. It was, Jake thought, a pretty good outcome for a simple rescue mission. The story of Commander Jake Morrison and Princess Kirasithera would be told and retold across the centuries, inspiring countless others to choose kindness over cruelty, compassion over indifference. But for them, it wasn't a story at all. It was just the beginning of the rest of their lives, lived together in a universe that had learned to be a little more gentle, a little more kind, and a little more hopeful than it had been before. And that perhaps was the most human victory of all.